Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets prepare for their final preseason matchup against the Toronto Raptors. And we ask, if the starters get a rest, who can make hay on the final roster for the Nets heading into the regular season? We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can keep those big season wins going on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And, Doug, it's over. The preseason is wrapping up on Friday night, and we get to turn our attention fully to the regular season, fully to the development of this roster. But maybe there's a chance that a couple of players nipping around the fringe can make a push to get to the regular season with Brooklyn.
Yeah, as the preseason winds down, if you've been watching any preseason hoops, you know around this third game or fourth game for some teams that they start to really take their foot off the gas when it comes to like who's playing and the starters and just making sure no one gets hurt. Or maybe you have a guys play 7 minutes, like play the first quarter rotation, and that's kind of it. So it gets a little wonky when it comes to the end of preseason. As we're recording this, we're not exactly sure what the Nets are going to do with their starting lineup. They just haven't reported it yet. We know Ben Simmons sat out last game, so maybe he returns and plays sort of like a tune-up set of minutes. Not exactly sure, but yeah, I think we can pretty much be certain that we're going to see some different guys here. Maybe some final looks at some players, maybe first looks at some guys. It's not exactly sure, but these end of the preseason is when you usually kind of clear out the cabinet a little bit and kind of see what you have left over, see what you can still reuse. And see what might be headed off into the sunset. So should be an interesting final game here against the Raptors.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, too, because we've talked about over the course of this preseason, okay, no Nicholas Claxton, so we don't quite get that sample size. Day'Ron Sharpe, a more extended injury. We don't get to see him. We don't get to see Trendon Watford. So you start to list some of the players that aren't available. And even though we've also talked about Killian Hayes, which was more opportunity-based coming into Brooklyn here and maybe being able to resurrect his career, those other three names we mentioned are guys that we all assume have significant roles. So it becomes a little bit trickier to really look at this roster and say, well, who's going to come in and really steal a job away from somebody else? I don't want to, gild the lily here, but it kind of feels pretty defined, at least 1 through 8 right now, even without having Nicholas Claxton or Trendon Watford or Day'Ron Sharpe. You'd say that you probably can be pretty confident about your top 8 in this moment. Then you add those 3 in and you've pushed to 11. So back into this roster might just be about, deep guys sitting on the bench and seeing if opportunities come depending on how game scripts go when the regular season starts.
Yeah, again, and it's hard. It's hard to know with this team. I'm not even sure that this team knows exactly what the plan is, right? And that's fine. I think that, you're going into the season in flux on purpose by design. And so I think the Nets might be the first to tell you that we're not exactly sure what all the rotations are going to look like and what all the playing time is going to look like and how long some of these guys are even going to be on the team and who's going to have an opportunity a month from now that doesn't have an opportunity now. I think this probably to some degree or a big degree will be the theme of the whole season, is that we're just constantly trying to reorder our expectations and just trying to figure out where things stand, because teams like this that are headed for the tank, that want to be competitive to some degree, but aren't really incentivized to win and could have veterans out the door. Like, these teams just get really hairy really quick when it comes to minutes and rotations and plans and all this stuff. Veterans don't play back-to-backs. Guys sit out, like this. It's just going to be like this, I think, all season. So in many ways, I think the preseason here is a sort of onboarding for fans to be what it's going to look like. Because I think if you're a fan that's going into the season, and we'll talk about some of these specific guys in a second, but if you're a fan going into the season and being like, I can't wait for this is going to be the starting lineup, and these are going to be the bench guys, and this is what we're going to kind of get every night, and I'm going to get kind of used. It's not going to be like that. It's just not going to be. Right. There's just no way. It's not going to be. It's going to be all different starting lineups, injuries, guys getting traded, young guys in here, young guys out, G League and back, 10-day contracts. Like, that's going to be the theme of this season. probably almost all 82 games. So I think if you're hoping for a set it and forget it experience with the Nets, you might just want to watch another team. I'm just being,
You might just want to set it to forget it. Not
or just really what I mean is rewire your expectations. Like, you need to rewire what you think is going to happen, because it's just not going to be this consistent, X minutes here, X minutes there, and we can kind of know what it's going to be like. When we can kind of know what it's going to be like. Some teams are like that. The Nets are for sure not going to be one of them.
And there's also, too, because just in terms of where the roster stands, the question marks we have here that we can break down as we go through it, you have two-way contracts already established, so you still have a third one. And I actually think that
and who are they? And just so everyone knows, who are the two-way contracts.
Yeah, you have Jalen Martin, and then Young Ji is also going to be on the two-way with the Long Island Nets. Yep. And listen, you can say what you want. It was a small sample size, but when she got on the court, like that dude, I saw Jalen Wilson at the presser, and he was having the conversation, and she came walking in with a totally studded out, like beautiful looking suit. And you got Jalen Wilson going, "Hey, man, how do I get one of those?" Like, I'll hook you up. Like, there's something around that kid. And we've already heard about, wanting to get more international and wanting to get that kind of exposure from ownership and from the NBA overall. I expect that he's the kind of guy that you will see get popped up here throughout the course of the season. But you have those two occupied right now, which means you do have this third one. So that third two-way contract is interesting for the Brooklyn Nets, because one of these players, and we'll talk about Dariq Whitehead here a little bit, how are you going to occupy that last one that has call-up ability throughout the year? And then you also have the overall roster numbers and a player like Bogdanovich, who isn't being talked about at all. And we know it's because he has the injury and there's no timeline for his return. What are the Nets going to do with him if you're going to sit here and potentially occupy a roster spot if you see a guy in the 15 to 17 kind of range that you'd like to maybe keep on this roster and not risk either one, sticking down in the G League for an entire year, or having to outright release because he's not eligible for that path either. So even though, to your point, fans need to adjust their expectations about what this season is going to be, if you haven't already settled on it being developmental and non-win associated, you also have to look at how committed the Nets are going to be to long-term development in this short-term 1-year window. So this stuff, to me, I find this stuff fascinating. I don't know if the fan base overall cares about the back end of this, but this is a year when it actually does.
Well, they should.
Yeah, this is a year. This is a year when these guys can make an impact and can make a name for themselves. This isn't the Kevin Durant, Kyrie, James Harden era where it didn't matter who you were. If you were young and you weren't about making championship runs, they weren't even going to bother giving you a look. So that's the fascinating part to this, and we can get into that here in a second about what they do at the back end of this roster when it comes to making developmental decisions, I would say.
And by the way, and just for clarification, you mentioned these only because you mentioned these two guy names, and this, but sure, everyone else, like Bojan and Dariq are not 10-day contract qualified, like that. No, only because those guys were wrapped. I think you were mostly saying like we haven't seen, we don't not exactly sure what the plan is. I mean, Bojan's money's not guaranteed. Dariq's on the rookie contract, he's still going to move probably between Long Island and the team, just because of like how it's going to break down. So I just wanted to clarify that because that came on the heels of the 10-day contract piece. All right, we're going to talk more about some of these other guys and the bench. Again, maybe about some of the guys we haven't seen yet and what their roles are going to be. We'll talk about that here in a second. First, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at Hims. Guys, look, sometimes the intimate moments, they're going to happen spontaneously. You want to be ready. You want to be able to perform in the bedroom. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you last longer, give you that boost of confidence. Be ready whenever the mood strikes. Look, sex life is important. We know this. Your schedule's busy also at the same time. You don't have time to go to the doctor's office to get treatments. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. You got to love to hear that. Hims is changing men's healthcare, providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. That's a win and then another win. The process is 100% online. There's no need for uncomfortable doctor visits. You just answer a series of questions on the site. The medical provider is going to determine the right treatment option. Start your free online visit at hims.com/lockedon. That's Hims, HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable, compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety by effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider to determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plan.
All right, as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, typically, as we said throughout the year, a Fan Take Friday, but this is mostly our version of if we purely were fans, which we are, but also sitting here commentating about it, what would we expect or want to see in this final preseason game against the Toronto Raptors for the Brooklyn Nets? You mentioned it there. So I put those two names in there at the end. The Bogdanovich piece, this again, I find that interesting because if you think he can get healthy, if you think he can have trade value, then there's a reason why you occupy that. Now, this is the antithesis of one another. Then you have Dariq Whitehead, who it's, hey, listen, don't bother looking over here. Let's pretend that he doesn't exist right now. And I don't mean that negatively. It's just he's the guy that you want to have absolutely zero pressure on, whether it's the injury, whether maybe it was a swing and a miss when it comes to the draft. Those are two guys that fall into the same pot for me of, I don't know. We have no concrete thought about either one of them having an impact in this Nets roster for the season, albeit Bogdanovich is clearly the guy that with veteran experience, if healthy, you could get value out of him. Whitehead just seems like a long-term development.
I don't think Bojan's even going to play like for the Nets.
Neither do I. I left him out of the minutes because how could you, right? When we did that early in the summer, how could you keep him in the minutes projections for a team that has, since they got him, has basically never mentioned his name once?
Never mentioned his name. He's been injured. He's still not even there. He did the money. Like I said, the money's not fully guaranteed, though. I have to look up exactly what the out is with that. I can't imagine he's going to want to just roll with this team that's just he knows is losing, right? Like, and even if he thought that there was anything left in the tank, like these are the guys with buyout candidates kind of guys, right? We sometimes talk about guys who are buyout candidates and sometimes aren't, or who can just move on and never play a minute. Like he's for sure. This is why we always talk about the Ben Simmons things. People are like, oh, buy him out. I'm like, hey, as a reminder, the buyout, it takes two to tango with buyouts. You have to have the team that wants to buy you out, and you have to have a player that's willing to accept a significantly lower number to end up getting bought out. And that's why Simmons would never just take less for sure. So, but Bojan's a different story. And so I'm at a point now where it'd be a surprise to me if he ever suited up. Not that he ever suited up in the NBA again. I think that could happen. It's just I just don't see why, based on all the circumstances, why that would ever happen for the Nets. And like you said, if you didn't see his name on the roster and with the money attached to it on the contract breakdowns, you'd be hard pressed to know he was even on the team because they have just barely said a word unless asked directly about him. And even then it's kind of not totally clear sort of what it is. And then the Dariq thing, I actually think Dariq will play more just to get into this preseason game. I actually do think we'll see more Whitehead minutes here. He played 5 last game. I wouldn't be shocked that gets up to 15, 18 tonight if some of these veterans sit. He's a candidate to play more. We just have to be able to see more from him to know.
Yeah, that's the two sides of the Dariq Whitehead is the sample size hasn't looked good, and you know that he has the injury, and you want to just let him take his time, and hopefully we talk about him next offseason. I think we mentioned this maybe last week. Hey, let's talk about him next summer league and let's see where he's at. But to your point about the preseason game and closing it out, he is healthy right now by everything that we know. So, man, would it be just an absolute buoy to him, to his confidence, the organization's confidence, if he came out and played 15, 20 minutes, and by the way, shot anything close to league average from beyond the arc or from, inside the paint, or just show little flashes of things, because to this point, and if you follow the show, we hate to drag young players because it's a long developmental process. But it's not just that you're not sure if he's healthy or fully back from that injury. He doesn't look comfortable out there. Yeah. I stress my mind to think of any sequences going back to the summer league and obviously going back to last season where I thought that Dariq Whitehead looked organically comfortable on the court. And that may be the physical piece, but it certainly is hard to kind of envision him. And you throw in, not to be long-winded, that the measurables on him a little bit, has some length, has some, size or some ability to put on some size. He doesn't look very big. He looks pretty slight. He looks pretty thin. And so all these things just combine into a unfortunate situation where I want to see him do well, and I just don't want to set any expectation that that's going to just flash here in one preseason game at the end of October.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nets fans, even the most bullish Dariq Whitehead people out there have had their
It
expectations
was
like
me. I was him when
significantly
they drafted
tempered.
him. It was me. Hand up.
After, I don't even mean that. I mean, even like, let's say after last season where he was in Long
Yeah.
Island and we didn't see much and whatever. And then you go into this season and you're like on the Dariq Whitehead train because that the pedigree's there coming out of high school and whatever. But if you just watch any summer league, you kind of like, I mean, there was like a few flashes here and there, but it looked way behind.
Yeah.
And then it hasn't looked any, and not to be shocking here, but if you're struggling a little bit at summer league, it doesn't get easier in preseason, and then it gets even harder if on like when the games actually matter, right? So
Yeah.
he's significantly behind developmentally there, not from an age curve, right? Still 20 years old, and if you factor in the injuries, and if you think he can kind of fully recover from the foot stuff and get back up to full physicality, then there's still plenty of time here, I think, right? I'm not worried here. And that's why we said too, it's like, hey, let's check in April, right? We'll check in April and we'll hope to see some G League, some balling out in the G League, which you have to do. If you're going to be able to be at the NBA level, you have to be able to go to the G League and crush, right? Like you can't just be okay at the G League. Like you have to be awesome, right? To think about making the next step up into the league. So let's get there and then see with him. But I do think he'll play more tonight. Like they've been sort of still committed to having him be part of this thing, right? Like even the 5 minutes last game, minutes the game before, right? Like there's still. Let me put it this way. This may be my final thought on Dariq. Can we move on? If he was not a first round pick, we would probably not be seeing as much of him. But because you're a first round pick, the leash is considerably longer. You were also a first round pick for a reason, right? So there's much more to like look back and kind of hold on to when we're trying to make a good evaluation. But if it was just based on performance, we would not have been seeing him. But when you're a first round pick and you were a number one player in the country at one point in high school, like you do get a longer look than other players.
Locked On Nets mind meld, because that was going to be, it's when you're drafted by this team, then they're going to want you to succeed and they're going to try to find ways to make it, opportunities for you to look successful or to continue to develop, as opposed to players you maybe take flyers on. I want to reset the table here. We'll close out the show talking about who we think are the guys that maybe make some hay here. But since we're talking about maybe deeper players getting some run here, less of the starters, when you look through this roster, Schroeder, Thomas, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton, let's call that the starting five. Yeah, I did it. Ben Simmons on the bench, 6. Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, and Day'Ron Sharpe. You get up to 9. We pick Bogdanovich out of the equation here. You're at 9 right now, and then you put in Zaire Williams, you put in Trendon Watford. You're going to put those 2 guys in there. That's up to 11. Then you get into this Keon Johnson, Shake Milton, has to be included there as well, and the enigmas of any of these other players. On the one hand, you go, well, how are these guys? We think we know that the kind of high end of this roster and the rotations. But I guess there is this world where there are a couple of spots just kind of sitting back here at the back end of the roster. You go, yeah, sure, be on the bench. And the backcourt becomes interesting with the performance of Shake Milton, which we've been highlighting. And then just who are the couple of players that you might look at and say, I wouldn't hate having them up here to start the season rather than waiting to see what becomes of them, whether it's Dariq Whitehead and wanting him to have time to develop, or the two-way guys that are going to come and go as they please. So coming up here in a second, we'll highlight who, if anyone, Killian Hayes, is going to be stashed on this bench to start the season with some optimism about what they can become. We'll do that to close things out in just one moment.
Before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, NFL, NBA fans, you can keep going with the season or start the season if you're going to the NBA with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're going to get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check the latest stats. You can go to the play-by-play. You're going to get so much more on the same page where you place your bets with the NBA. Nets plus 1.5 going in, 1.5 going into playing Toronto in this game. You always got to take the favor. You got to take the underdog Nets where you can get them. And I always wonder too, like where's FanDuel come up with this? It's like this is where these guys are the best in the business, right? It's like they're giving you lines on games we're not even totally sure about. This is what FanDuel is going to be able to do. And then you head over to Sunday, you get the player props. I mean, good luck. Start now, and then by 1 p.m. Sunday, you'll have gotten through all the player props over on FanDuel. But you're going to need to start now. Like I'm being serious. Like you're gonna need to put the time in if you want to be able to dive into all of them. That's just how many they have. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 real money bet over at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we close out today's Locked On Nets episode, obviously the Brooklyn Nets will be finishing off their preseason run against the Toronto Raptors on Friday night, and then we'll turn our attention fully to what the roster will look like going to the regular season. I want to get to these quotes because Jordi Fernandez was asked about Killian Hayes, and there's some nice bites here, and then there's also just what we like to call a little bit of a word salad, where it's just throwing out a lot of words, and by the time he's done speaking, you go, "Did you say anything at all there?" And the reason why I bring him up is I'm going to tell you right now. I didn't think I was going to be the guy that would say this, but I'm suspicious that the Brooklyn Nets are going to carry Killian Hayes into the regular season. I think that there is like just enough lack of reason not to, because the season's going to be, tankathon, and we're going towards the top of the draft board. And because it's a pedigree player, and what does it matter if you end up releasing him 2 weeks into the year? What does it matter if you do it a month into the season? I actually think that the stakes are so low for the Brooklyn Nets, and because they're still going to have some roster spots here as we talk about. I'll get to these quotes in a second, but do you think that that is absolutely insane to go, in spite of being injured, in spite of not being out there for preseason, Killian Hayes might actually have an inside track to a roster spot?
Well, drink if you're playing the Killian Hayes drinking game in the Locked On Nets podcast. It's time for another drink. No one's talked more about this guy that hasn't played a single second for the team. It's unbelievable. I say it every podcast. We mention this guy every podcast. He hasn't played, but I just don't even have a good feel on this. I don't even want to make a good determination. I think your probably gut instinct is correct, but everyone's just holding on hope. It's funny actually. The Dariq Whitehead comp sort of applies here too. Right, to
Yes.
Killian Hayes, like that comp, kind of everything
let's hope that Dariq Whitehead is not following in Killian Hayes' footsteps here from a career trajectory standpoint.
Just about everything we said about Dariq applies to Killian Hayes. It's like, well, why do you keep talking about him? Because he had these other things attached to him in the past. Have we seen tons of it at this level? Not really, but it's like it's different, but it's not that different. And so we keep talking about him because we just are holding out hope. And again, too, for the millionth time, it's a position that the Nets desperately need also,
yes.
Right? It's not like if he was just let me put it, if he was a big stretch wing, there are actually fewer minutes for him, right? Because they have guys like this, like Cam J, DFS, Trendon Watford, Zaire Williams, Noah Clowney, like they have Jalen Wilson, they have a bunch of guys who are sort of like 3-4 prototypes, and the Clowney doesn't fit there, but like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At the 1 and 2, where they're really thin, Hayes there would be a huge opportunity, and that's what makes this disappointing. So I'm with you on the gut piece, but I just don't. I just can't. It's so hard to make a determination. We just have so little to work with.
And I want to move this into really because it's the backcourt conversation around roster spots, etc. But we'll see how he plays out. But so far, I'm happy with him. Jordi Fernandez said everything he's done, he's like a true point guard. I've seen him play live in practice, and you guys haven't. He said after the New York Post, Brian Lewis, I've seen him and I'm very happy with him. Killian's got a good feel for the game. He's worked really hard the whole time we've had him here. It's been really good at camp. Unfortunately, these type of minor injuries happen. So again, word salad. Hey, I like him. You haven't seen it, but we like what we're getting. Not sure when we're going to get it, but it's all going to work out in the end. And I just think that he will end up being a part of this mix. Now, why is that maybe interesting? Because we've talked about Shake Milton, and he clearly has pushed himself, at least in the short term, at least going into the season, into the conversation of that backcourt. Then you get into like the Keon Johnson of it all, who had a minor injury, looks like he's on track. But is this, I think you'll agree, how many bodies can we throw at it? How many roster spots can we occupy inside of this backcourt? So on a game-to-game basis, when we're getting blown out, we pull out Schroeder, we say, hey, Keon Johnson, get in there. Let's see what you look like. Or what's the different combinations with Cam Thomas? It feels like the Nets are going to be willing to maybe just hold on to 2 or 3 bodies in the backcourt for the sake of seeing what shakes out over the course of the season, as opposed to other positions where it feels like we're pretty set.
Or just like maybe it doesn't happen right now, and then the roster changes some, and they need to bring someone back in, right? Like there's lots of stuff, 10-day contracts. There's things that happen here.
Because, by the way, sorry, not to cut you off. You said this year over year, where it's like a lot of times the problems kind of solve themselves. Somebody gets injured.
Let me give you an example of this.
Something happens. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to present to you the 2023-2024 Memphis Grizzlies very quickly to show you what happens when the wheels completely fall off a season, veterans get hurt, and you're trying to tank. Right. Yeah. Like, so, and I know everyone's fallen in love with the names that they have now. I swear I'm going to roll through this quick. These are some names of guys that played more than 5 games for the Grizzlies last year. Jordan Goodwin. I'm not even going to forget the good guys like Bane and JJ, Triple J, and Ja, and like guys like this, right? These are like, so Jordan Goodwin, Scottie Pippen Jr., Timmy Allen, Trey Jamison, Bismack Biyombo rolled a ton of minutes, David Roddy, Xavier Simpson, Lamar Stevens, keep going. Conchar, he played a lot. Xavier Tillman, he ended up getting traded. Zaire, he played. Tosan Evie Boyman, I always say Evie Boyman on that one. Gilliard played, Pierre played, Jalen Noel played. Dejan Giroux, the list goes on. Like Wendy and Gabriel, Jack White, right? Like, okay, so these aren't exactly guys that you're queuing up in NBA 2K to like just, roll, to just create your dream team, right? By the way, I didn't even come close to reading the whole list here. Like they had so many dudes that ended up playing for this team. 33 guys, 33 players played for the Grizzlies last year, at least a game. And most of those guys played more than one. Almost everyone played at least 4 of that group. So I only say this to present to you, like, I know we have this idea set in our heads of what things look like now. And you're like, where are the minutes going to come from? Who's going to play? What's going to happen? Okay. It's an extreme example for sure, this Grizzlies thing. But it's not too crazy when you start, veterans get hurt, guys get traded. And all of a sudden, you got 10-day contracts. 10 days are up. Who's next 10-day contract can come in because we don't want to have too many of these, or we're going to sign you to a long-term deal. Last point on this. It's going to look much closer to this, the Grizzlies thing, than to what you think it's going to look like now. Yeah. By the end of the season. When we catch up in April, that list is going to look more like this than it does with the Nets now.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you're going to probably see different waves of this, let alone you talk about number of players getting minutes for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll just wait until the trade deadline happens too, and you start clearing out some guys.
Or just 2 of these guys get hurt. Cam Johnson pulls his hamstring, or like whatever. Everyone gets hurt. Half the guys are hurt already. Like they all get hurt. So
well, I don't have to paint the picture. It's happening right now. The picture is it's Nicholas Claxton, it's Trendon Watford, it's Day'Ron Sharpe, it's Keon Johnson in and out. Like we're already getting it's Killian Hayes. That's 5 guys right there that have injuries that are going to impact who is available or not for this roster. The last thing I'll say, just to close things out, is I wanted to make sure that we just make mention of a couple of the other young guys like Amari Bailey. If you're talking about who you're going to see tonight, you'll see some Amari Bailey tonight. That'll be good just for him on an individual player level. There's going to be a couple of guys like that. We mentioned Chi earlier. I think you'll see him play in this game. So it's going to be more of the deep cuts. Jalen Martin, obviously, Tyrese Martin. Like you're going to get a lot of these guys. Now, Tyrese Martin, 25, but Jalen Martin at 20. Like, hey, these are players that you can think about. When will they get their call-ups? When can we see more of them as well? The only thing that's interesting, I think, here is just noting that if the starters go, you mentioned Ben Simmons, will you get a final little tune-up here? It's not going to tell us anything, but I think you'll know from Jordi Fernandez how he feels about what we're going into the season with based on whether or not you see any of some of those top veteran players versus, hey, we're going to go ahead and empty the roster here, play all the young guys, play the 10-day contracts, and just get through this final game and then make our push towards the regular season.
Yeah, and look, I'm kind of obsessed with this Grizzlies thing now because I think this is a good reminder. Well, it's just a good reminder that best laid plans, even in the best of situations, usually kind of go a lot differently. And best laid plans, when you're not all that interested in winning a lot of games, it starts to look like something that believe me, you cannot imagine. You can't imagine. And I'm gonna actually look through a couple of these other teams too. Again, the Grizzlies were
prime example,
a mess's mess. It was truly a disaster.
The Nets roster is going to quickly become the least exclusive club in the NBA, right? Like this is not you're getting bounced to the door. This is, hey man, come on in. Well, you brought a friend with you.
Again, I left off Jack White, Matt Hurt, Kenny Lofton, Shaquille Harris. I left
Jack
guys
White,
off
the guitarist.
Yes, Meg and Jack. They both grabbed minutes. Meg and Jack grabbed minutes at the 1 and the 2. One game, but it was pretty beautiful. There was a 7 Nation Army up there in Memphis. Okay, we are going to get out of here on that very high quality note. Make sure that you go over to go to WeGotNets.com and join the people that are rolling in here right now, getting our free look at the NBA season. And look, these stories, you don't have to read them all before the NBA season starts. You're going to get 4 stories that are the highest, like the biggest stuff that you're going to watch for going into the season. You're going to get a weekly newsletter that's going to break down what's happening. So it's all going to be, it's free. Well, who doesn't like a free thing? You got to put in your email. Literally WeGotNets.com. Go grab the free stories right now.
Well, there aren't many things I have left to do that I haven't already done. I'm interested in the ideas that can shake us all up. Why, that is Jack White.
Ah, buddy.
Come
I
on
knew
now.
it was coming. It was
Look
coming. You're the
fast
best. Not the best in the business for nothing.
Home row
One
keys.
of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again Monday, getting started for the regular season with more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.